Great leaders inspire greatness in others. That is the tagline, the lead-in quote to the very first episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars. And I find it somewhat appropriate that it's a Yoda-focused episode. That was probably on purpose due to his quote in Empire that wars make not one great. It's a nice tie-in. And also very true, I think, in what he teaches Luke in Empire and in what he teaches his 3 clone companions on this episode, Ambush. Now, the intro stuff is good. There's narration over it. I kind of talked in the movie about why I like that kind of thing. I noticed, because I have watched a lot of this show before, that there are a lot of recycled scenes from the episodes that will be upcoming from this. And that's a good reuse of assets, first of all. That was really nice. First thing I want to talk about. Well, not really the first thing, but the one thing I know that I want to keep praising about this series is the amount of detail and creativity that goes into the worlds and to the machinery and to the cultures of everything that is shown on the screen. The planet is probably the most particular example of this. It's a very coral landscape. You get the idea that this planet was once a huge planet-spanning ocean, kind of like how Kamino is in Attack of the Clones. And here you see a planet that used to be that, and I thought that was a really creative touch. This episode could easily have been boring if the landscape on which Yoda and crew and everyone are stranded on or are trying to get to the king, if that landscape was bland, then I think the episode would have been lesser for it. Let me just put it like that. Checking my notes, as always. I like how Dooku just kind of invites himself to this meeting. It's kind of... they do attempt to explain how Dooku knows about this meeting. The king says that his spies serve him well, but I think we both know that it wasn't exactly the spies. You see, in the pre-intro thing, there's a segment where it makes it pretty clear that Chancellor Palpatine is aware of this mission. And if Chancellor Palpatine is aware of this mission, then so is Count Dooku, for reasons that should be obvious, I would think. So Dooku's there, and I don't know what I want to talk about this. His plan makes sense if it was anyone else but Yoda here on the planet. And that it confuses the hell out of me. Okay, you know what? I'm going to talk about it now. So Dooku sends Asajj Ventress, his Padawan or Sith acolyte, whatever term you prefer, with like a battalion, I think, of droids, in order to convince the... well, actually, no, that's not the first thing he does. First, he ambushes Yoda's diplomatic convoy ship. Why they didn't anticipate a trap like this, I don't know, but whatever. So Yoda's ship is ambushed, and then Ventress shows up, and Dooku says, how can they protect you? Because that's what this alliance between the king and the Republic would be all about, right? Protection. How can they protect you, the king, if they cannot protect themselves? Now, first of all, like, okay, this is a good tactic right here. Try to show that you are superior to the enemy. Makes sense, right? Except that he should know, Dooku should know his old master is more than capable of surviving an ambush like this, an assault. Now, Dooku does later mention on in the episode that Yoda made a mistake straying too far from Coruscant. That might be his arrogance overplaying him here, but I would think that Dooku, who has a personal knowledge and experience with Yoda, that would kind of mitigate his arrogance a bit. But it doesn't. So Yoda survives, and then Dooku's plan next is for there to be a combat trial that that King Katunko says that he's heard that Jedi are worth 100 battle droids. And then it said, well, okay, let's have Yoda prove his right in combat. Now, it's interesting that Yoda takes up the offer, probably because he needs to, but I find it dumb because Dooku should know that of all Jedi, Yoda would be the one to survive this type of thing. Now, maybe he thinks he's impossibly outnumbered. Maybe he thinks that he was injured. Maybe he thinks a dozen of other things, but it's still kind of eyebrow-raising to me that Dooku would have thought up this basic plan that probably could have worked against any other Jedi that wasn't a council member, but particularly, whatever. It's weird, it's dumb. Moving on. I'll return to Ventress and her idiocy later. So, going back to before Yoda is ambushed, because I just wanted to talk about the plan overall. Yoda's confidence and speed at which he doles out orders makes perfect sense to me, because this is a man, this is a creature, an alien, who's lived hundreds and hundreds of years, has probably seen his fair share of combat, knows generally the strategies of what will and will not work. Notice he does not sound surprised that they are ambushed, but he quickly and concisely comes up with a plan that will get his troops to safety, the ones that don't need to be with him, and would get him to his mission on the planet below. He does not hesitate to continue his mission. He does not think for a second to abandon it. And that, I think, is very Yoda, in that he will complete something if he can. So, all the escape pods are fired, and then there's some quips from the battle droids, and that brings me to my next point. So, this is going to be a problem throughout I don't want to call it a problem. It is a fact of the Clone Wars series. It will spill over into Rebels. It might be in Resistance, for all we know. And that is that the bad guys are basic comic relief. Now, this doesn't make sense if you really, break it down, if you think about it. Unless you add one other thing, and I'm going to get to that other thing later, but what it basically boils down to is that it makes no sense for these murderous death bots that are created en masse to just kill and occupy and strike fear into the hearts of the people that are being conquered by the Separatists, for them to be cracking jokes. That doesn't make sense to me, and it never really has. Unless you count one point. Now, I don't know what I'm going to call this, because I don't know if it's an effect, a syndrome, a principle, but basically there is a thing that happens in animation, and this is becoming less so now with adult animation TV shows and movies like Sausage Party, but generally in animation, things are made more kid-like and simpler, and things are more funny than they normally would be. Some characters may act more childlike, or in bad instances of this, childish, than they normally would in their live-action counterparts. For example, battle droids don't really crack jokes in episodes 1, 2, or 3. There are still funny moments involving them, but that's mainly situational. It's not so much what they say is humorous in and of itself, if that makes sense. So, I don't know what I'm going to call that. There might be a trope name for it already. I don't know. Please let me know in the comments below. And again, I have no problem with this being a kid's show. I recognize that. It's just weird to me that these murderous death bots of death, even though they are shown to be pretty incompetent in comparison to the Jedi and even to most of the clones, that they're cracking jokes. So I just wanted to bring that up here, and I'll try to keep myself down from mentioning it in previous episodes unless it overwhelms the episode. There are only a few minor moments that even though they're there for padding, they don't annoy me as much because the character moments of this episode really make it for me. And that brings me to another thing. Again, the character moments are what saved this episode for me. The plot is very basic. Basically get from point A to point B, survive all the waves of attacks. You know, there isn't a lot of interesting dynamic storytelling in a lot of ways. But what is interesting are the character interactions, particularly and almost exclusively the interactions between Yoda and the clones. I believe that's Thyre, Jack, and I have it written down here, Reese. Thyre, Jack, and Reese. And one of which was retconned to have appeared in Revenge of the Sith, so that's fun. Okay. So what I like from the beginning here is that the clones kind of treat themselves as expendable. They're here to protect the general. They, once they get separated from Yoda, they think, well, we'll just hold them off and hope that the general gets to the king in time. They don't even have a second thought for themselves of them getting out of this alive. And in a sense, that's very much what you want in a bred soldier. For these clones that were bred for war. And it's funny when you think about it, to me, how much the clones and the droids are similar. And in the best episodes of the Clone Wars, they kind of touch on this a little bit, even though I wish they did more. But the point being that Yoda treats them not how they expect. When, I believe it's Reese is injured, he expects to be left behind. All of the clones expect to be left behind. But Yoda definitively says, left behind no one will be. And that's very Jedi in the best way, and that's very Yoda, to see all of these clones as individuals. And that brings me to the scene in the cave. Now the cave scene, some people I've heard is just padding, but I would disagree. It is probably the core, I guess I would say, character moment, and also probably thematic moment of the episode. The whole tying into, if I can just look at the quote again, that great leaders inspire greatness in others. In my opinion, these clones are very good at their job, but they do not become great at what they're doing in the episode and really focusing and listening and paying attention until Yoda has this talk with them, because he is a great leader, although I expect his humility would make him disagree. But I want to go down the advice that he gives to each of the clones, because I think it is important and highlights something different about Yoda and the Jedi mindset as a whole. He says first to Reese, look to yourself and those beside you for inspiration. Now this is very light side, because the dark side is very inward focused. It's all about me and my pain and my anger. It's a very self-fulfilling cycle and self-fueling cycle. It's why the more time you spend immersed in the dark side, the more angry you are, and the more that fuels your powers, and the more you're using your powers, usually the more, it's an emotional feedback loop, is what I'm saying, right? And Yoda very clearly counters that in a way to, he says, yes, look to yourself, but also look to others. Do not be solely your input, but others' inputs as well. It'll help you, first of all, tactically, because that's just sound in any situation, basically. But also, you could argue for the Jedi spiritually, emotionally, so on and so forth. He says to Jack next, mind over matter, basically. Use your mind over your matter, over weapons. That you can outsmart the droids, and that's how you will win. And Yoda shows this several times, I think properly, humorously, in previous scenes, of using his size and his stature, his mobility to get around what would probably be, in a very straightforward fight, very debilitating for him. He uses those things to his advantage. Basically, not to be obsessed with weapons, be obsessed with what you can use and those will be your weapons, if that makes any sense. And this is probably in conjunction with the Jedi Order, the fact that a lot of great Jedi don't use their lightsabers that much, and only when they have to. You notice that Yoda doesn't even bring his out until he needs to deflect lightsaber bolts, which is a very practical use of a lightsaber. It's a very defensive use of the lightsaber. Before that, he was just using his mind and outsmarting the droids. And then the awesome scene with him wrecking all of the other droids happens, but, you get my point. Finally, he says to Thyre, "Rush not into war. Only by being a survivor will you prevail." Now, that's a paraphrase, but that's basically what he says. And I think that's just great life advice in general, right? I mean, we might want to rush into things, we might want to do everything now, but only by rolling with the punches, only by strategizing, only by thinking and not just rushing in, will we prevail. Now, there is a balance to that, obviously, which is why I think, and several others have said, that it is bad to also be too far into the light side as well. So that was great. That was probably the core moment of the episode that I loved, aside from Yoda kicking ass shortly afterwards. But now I want to go to why Dooku was even more of an idiot for trusting Ventress with this assignment. You see, the king asks that Yoda be given a fair fight, fair trial in combat. And diplomatically, this would be a great way to show that the Separatists are fair. That perhaps even if, let's say that Ventress and Count Dooku are fair on their word. He gets a fair fight, no droidekas showing up unannounced, the odds are fairly equal, and the droids capture Yoda. Now, I would bet that the king would probably take Dooku's offer to join the Separatists on that. I mean, that would make sense. But they throw everything they have at Yoda and still lose. Now, let's say that in the scene leading up to the scene where Yoda kicks a ton of droid ass, that when Ventress says, shoot him now, that they do, and kill him. Now, to the Separatist definition, they've won that right of combat, but it has not been a fair fight. So then you have Ventress probably murdering the king, probably murdering the bodyguards, finding the next person, and hoping that he is more sympathetic to you. It's not a very smart thing, and I wish the show gets better at this later on, but I dislike the sort of black and white evil mentality, especially in the Clone Wars and in Star Wars overall. Now, there is something to be said for tales of strict good and evil. I think those are important. I am a Catholic myself, to share some personal information. There are very distinct delineations of good and evil. However, I'm also a mature adult to know that life doesn't always work that way. There are grays, there are situations where it is hard to decide what is the right thing to do. And I think this is a little, bit of early Clone Wars syndrome, in that the decision is fairly obvious what should happen. The king should go with Yoda and the clones and the Republic, right? You should not go with the Separatists who cheat and lose, who cheat and are sore losers, right? Now, this could be explained away by one thing that I will only get into very briefly, and I might bring up a few more times as it becomes relevant. Now, this is mainly EU information, but I think it still fits into canon from what we know. And that was that Palpatine, though he did control both the Republic and the CIS, Confederacy of Independent Systems, that even though he was willing to take whichever side won, he would have preferred and wished that the Republic would win. Which I think would explain why so many times the Separatists may be ahead of the Republic, but just by a little bit. There are hardly ever any overwhelming situations where the Republic just cannot catch up. The big exceptions probably being the Malevolence super weapon, and that's probably the only one I can think of right now, honestly. So it could be explained away that the reason why Dooku and Ventress act really stupid evil and do not diplomatize correctly almost at all is because Sidious specifically said, if X happens, if Y happens, if Z happens, kill him. Don't try to be diplomatic about this. And I could see that. However, the episode offers no explanation, so I'm going to count it as dumb. I swear, this episode is very bipolar for me. I love moments of it, and then I'm just like rolling my eyes the next moment. So then Yoda and crew get to Ventress, after Dooku stupidly threatens Ventress to kill the king. And I love how effortless it is for Yoda to stop Ventress from killing the king. He holds his hand out there. He calmly says, pleased to meet you, I am, or something along those lines. And just casually kind of looks to Ventress, casually looks to the droids behind her and to Dooku. And just like shoves her away. It's very effortless for him. And in terms of the Force, the only other people I can think who can do things like that are probably Anakin/Vader. That I can remember, of course. So that's great to just show his awesome power in a very subtle way. And that's awesome. And then something also kind of eye-rolling happens. I swear it's a theme. So Yoda lets Ventress go. Or I should say, I don't think he makes any active effort at all to stop her. He says, surrender you should. Which, I know Yoda can be quite a bit idealistic at times, but I'm pretty sure he would know that Ventress would not just surrender. I have to think that Dooku may have sat her down and said, if you're ever cornered by Master Yoda, you just need to blow something up or just cause something to fall on top of other people, and he'll just ignore you so you can escape. Because that's basically, the way that Ventress escapes is almost, a callback to the way Dooku escapes. Now, I don't know if that was intentional, or if that just happens to be the case, that it lined up that way. Whatever the case, I still think it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think Yoda would have tried to kill Ventress. I don't think that's his style, unless she flat out attacked the king, and the only way to stop her quickly and efficiently was to kill her. I don't think he would have done it unless that had happened. I do think he could have tried harder to keep her there. Again, though, you could argue how much strength and concentration it would have taken for Yoda to hold up all those rocks in front of the king. Granted. It's still a weird choice to me, a weird narrative choice. Perhaps it was just because they wanted Ventress to be in more of the show, and I'm okay kind of with bad writing if you do something good with it down the road, and they did do some good stuff with Ventress down the road. So I'm kind of at a net loss, or net shrug, as to why they did this, and why the writers decided to do this, excuse me. Last thing. It is a great gesture, and it is a great moment to see King Katunko join the Republic, especially knowing how it turns out for him later. But anyways, there's a great cultural touch. The unsheathing of the sword, and saying, I will allow the Republic to build a base here. We will have an alliance, and present this ceremonial sword to Yoda as a symbol of trust. Now, that is a real cultural thing that happens happens and has happened throughout human history, though I am at a loss for a specific example right now. Still, it was a great touch. It could have been easy, it would have been less expensive, animation-wise, for him to just say, yep, awesome, we're with you, peace, and then the episode ends, right? But no, they took their time to show that, someone's impatient, to show that ceremonial touch, that ceremonial cultural thing with the sword. And that's great. That adds character to the king. That adds character to Yoda for accepting it. That adds culture to the Toydarians, who at this point we've only seen Watto, who I don't exactly think he's racist, a racist interpretation, but whatever. Anyways, I loved parts of this episode. I rolled my eyes. And we're back. Hello. Sorry about that. You might notice that my shirt is different. Well, my camera died. Not for any reason like I didn't charge it or anything. It kind of just didn't work after a while. But I got it fixed. It's another day. My shirt is different, but I'm going to conclude this video. So I believe I left off with how I liked how they expanded on the Toydarian race. How we now know that they're all not semi-racist caricatures like Watto. That's great, diversity. And then the episode ends. As I think I started saying, it was a very bipolar episode for me. There were some things in the episode I absolutely adored. Other things I either rolled my eye at, or couldn't care less about, or thought it was downright dumb. Hopefully the next couple of episodes will hit a better tone with me. Anyways, I'll see you guys next week. Until then, this is Analyze Nation. I'll see you all around.